Would you sleep in a barn just to survive another night? That was the question Helen Evans asked herself as she stood shivering at the edge of Benjamin Watson's mountain ranch. The wind cut sharp through the valley, rattling the wooden barn doors, carrying with it the cold bite of winter that threatened to swallow her whole. She had come too far to turn back now, and she had nothing left to lose. Helen's journey to this remote valley began 2 months earlier in the noisy town of Denver. Her life had crumbled in a single afternoon when a telegram arrived, telling her that her husband Thomas had been killed in a mining accident. The words on the paper were short and cruel, leaving her with nothing but debts and grief. Her small job as a seamstress in Mrs. Patterson's shop ended quickly. A widow without steady work was seen as a burden, and Mrs. Patterson, though kind, could not keep her. Within days, Helen lost both her job and her room above the shop. She searched boarding houses, begged for work, but no one wanted a woman with no references. The only offers came from saloons, and she knew what kind of work they meant. Helen refused. She would starve before she sold her dignity. By the end of the week, she was sleeping in alleys, clutching her thin shawl against the chill, counting coins that could not even buy her a week of meals. Each night her hunger grew sharper, and each morning her hope thinned. Then she overheard 2 cowboys in the mercantile speaking of ranches hidden deep in the mountains. Ranches that always needed strong hands and loyal workers. Helen's heart clung to those words. She remembered the small farm she grew up on in Missouri, milking cows, gathering eggs, mending fences. Maybe she could prove useful again. With her last dollars, she bought a second-hand coat, boots too big for her feet, and a small bundle of jerky and hardtack. The shopkeeper, an older man with kind eyes, looked at her as if he admired her stubbornness. Most women would have chosen the saloon. Helen chose the mountains. Her first attempts nearly broke her spirit. One rancher laughed in her face, calling her a pampered town woman. Another made an offer that turned her stomach and sent her fleeing into the night. For 2 long weeks she wandered mountain trails, sleeping in abandoned cabins and under trees, her dress tearing on thorns, her boots splitting apart, her face growing pale from hunger. The high country was beautiful but merciless, and Helen knew she could not last much longer. It was desperation that brought her to Benjamin Watson's ranch. The house stood solid and quiet at the base of a valley, smoke curling from the chimney, the barn larger than the house itself. Horses shifted in the corral, stamping their hooves against the cold. For nearly an hour she stood at the edge, gathering courage. Her hair was unpinned and tangled, her dress torn, her hands trembling. She knew she looked like a beggar, but this was her last chance. The sound of an axe striking wood drew her eyes. A tall man stood beside a neat pile of firewood, splitting logs with calm, steady strokes. Even from a distance, Benjamin Watson looked like the mountains around him, broad, silent, unyielding. His dark hair brushed his shoulders, and his beard was trimmed but full. He worked without hurry, stacking each log with care. There was something about his steady rhythm that gave Helen courage. When she stepped onto the gravel path, he turned, eyes sharp and unreadable. Helen felt her cheeks burn under his gaze, but she lifted her chin. "Good afternoon," she said softly. "I'm looking for work. Any kind of work. I can cook, clean, mend clothes, tend animals. I'm not afraid of hard labor, and I learn quickly." The words tumbled out too fast, her desperation spilling over. Benjamin's face remained impassive, though his eyes lingered on the thin wedding band still on her finger. "What happened to your husband?" he asked at last, his voice deep and rough. Helen's throat tightened, but she forced the words out. She told him about Thomas, about the mine, about the cruel chain of events that had left her standing before him in rags. Benjamin listened without interrupting, nodding now and then, his dark eyes fixed on her face, as if measuring every word. When she finished, silence filled the air between them. Helen heard the barn door creak in the wind, the cattle lowing in the distance, the crackle of pine trees in the cold breeze. Her breath caught. She was certain he would turn her away, just as others had. Finally, Benjamin spoke. "Winter comes early here. I could use help with cooking in the house. Maybe lighter work around the place. The pay won't be much, mostly room and board, but you'll have food and a roof." Relief washed over Helen so quickly she almost wept, but she forced herself to stay calm. Benjamin wasn't done. "I live alone here," he continued. "I don't want company or complaints. You'll work hard, do what's needed without being told twice. If you can handle that, you can stay." "I understand," Helen said quickly. Her voice shook with gratitude. "Thank you. I won't disappoint you." Benjamin studied her for one more long moment, then set down his axe with a sharp nod. "Come on then. I'll show you where you'll be staying." Helen followed him toward the house. Her heart thudded with a mix of relief and fear. She had found shelter at last, but she also sensed that life with this mountain man would test her in ways she had never imagined. Inside, the air was warmer, the fire crackling in the stone hearth. The house was simple but well cared for, every piece of furniture sturdy and built for use, not beauty. Benjamin pointed toward a small storage room at the back. "You can sleep there," he said. Helen nodded, her eyes stinging. It wasn't much, but it was safe, safer than the alleys of Denver. Safer than the wild trails. That night, as she lay in the narrow storage room, listening to the wind howling outside, Helen whispered into the dark. "I'll sleep in the barn if I have to. Just give me work." Quote. She did not yet know how close she had come to losing everything, nor could she know that soon Benjamin Watson would speak words that would change the course of her life forever. The weeks that followed tested Helen in every way. From the first light of dawn, she threw herself into work with a determination born of desperation. She scrubbed the floors, mended Benjamin's shirts, kept the fire burning, and learned the rhythm of his household. Her hands, once soft from sewing dresses in Denver, grew rough and red. But with every blister and every ache, she felt herself earning her place. Benjamin rarely spoke more than a few words, but Helen noticed the subtle signs of his approval. A nod when supper tasted good. A grunt of satisfaction when his clothes were neatly mended. He never praised her, yet she knew he noticed everything she did. Slowly she began to see past his gruff silence. He was not unkind, only careful. Like the mountains, he revealed himself only to those willing to wait. Still, the cold grew sharper with each passing night. The little storage room where Helen slept was never meant for living. Its thin walls trapped no heat, and by October, the frost was already creeping in. She piled on every blanket she could find but still shivered so badly that her teeth chattered. Each morning she forced herself to rise before Benjamin, hiding her exhaustion behind a brave face. She could not risk him thinking she was weak. But her body betrayed her. One morning Benjamin found her collapsed near the kitchen stove, too dizzy to stand. He lifted her easily in his strong arms and set her by the fire, wrapping her in blankets. His dark eyes studied her pale face. "You're freezing to death in that room," he said firmly. Helen tried to protest, but he silenced her with a sharp shake of his head. That evening, after supper, Benjamin sat across from her at the table, his voice low and steady. "The storage room isn't fit for winter," he said. "You won't survive in there." Helen's heart sank. Was this the moment he would send her away? "I understand," she whispered, staring down at her hands. "I'll find somewhere else to go." Benjamin leaned forward, his gaze cutting through her despair. "That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying you'll move into my room. It has a fireplace. It stays warm." Helen's breath caught. His room. The thought was unthinkable. No decent woman shared a room with a man who wasn't her husband. "I couldn't," she stammered. "This isn't about what's proper," Benjamin said firmly. "This is about survival. There's no one here to judge us. There's only the cold, and I won't have you dying in my house." For a long moment Helen sat in silence, torn between the rules of society and the harsh truth of the mountains. Finally, she saw the truth in his eyes. This was not desire, but necessity. He was offering her safety, not scandal. "All right," she whispered. Benjamin set up a cot on the far side of his room and hung a blanket between the beds for privacy. The first nights were awkward, Helen lying stiffly awake, listening to his steady breathing on the other side. But slowly, she began to relax. He never crossed the line, never so much as looked at her without respect. The warmth of the fireplace kept her alive, and for the first time since arriving, she slept through the night. As the snow deepened, so did their understanding of each other. They worked side by side through storms, chopping wood, feeding cattle, braving the frozen dawn to keep the ranch alive. In the evenings, they shared quiet meals by the fire. Sometimes, Benjamin asked about her childhood in Missouri, and Helen found herself telling him stories she had never spoken aloud in years. In return, he spoke of his life after the war, of the valley that had called him to stay, of his choice to live alone until now. Helen began to see the man behind the silence. He was not cold, but steady. Not unfeeling, but cautious. His strength was not just in muscle, but in the way he carried burdens without complaint. And somewhere between the long nights and hard days, Helen felt something shift inside her. She no longer thought of herself as a beggar at his door. She was part of this place now, part of his world. And when she caught him watching her sometimes, a quiet softness in his eyes, she realized he saw her the same way. The storm that changed everything came in December. The wind roared like a living thing, rattling the shutters and shaking the house. Snow piled high against the door. The fire in their room burned low, the wood pile nearly gone. Benjamin stirred from his bed, his face grim. "The woodshed's out there, but in this storm I might not make it back." Helen sat up, fear nodding in her chest. Without more wood, they would freeze before dawn. "There has to be another way," she whispered. Benjamin's dark eyes met hers in the flickering light. His voice was low but steady. "There is. We share the bed, share our warmth. It's the only way to make it through the night." The world seemed to stop. Helen's heart pounded. She thought of her husband, of the shameful whispers this choice would bring in town. But there was no town here. No whispers, only survival. And the man before her, who had offered her nothing but respect from the day she arrived. She drew a breath and met his gaze. "If you think it's necessary," she said softly. Benjamin nodded once. The decision was made. That night, as the blizzard raged outside, Helen lay in his arms, feeling his steady warmth drive the chill from her bones. For the first time since Thomas's death, she felt safe. For the first time in her life, she wondered if safety could grow into something more. The storm outside showed no mercy. Snow hammered against the roof, and the wind screamed through every crack in the cabin walls. Yet inside, Helen felt warmth for the first time in weeks. Benjamin's steady arm wrapped around her as they lay beneath heavy quilts, their breath mingling in the cold air. She had feared this moment, feared what it might mean, but there was no shame in it. Only safety, only survival. At first they kept a careful distance, lying side by side without speaking. But as the hours passed and the fire died down, Helen shivered, and instinct pulled her closer. Benjamin shifted slightly, drawing her into the circle of his strength. He did not speak, did not demand, only held her with quiet steadiness. Helen closed her eyes and let herself rest against him. Morning came pale and gray, the storm easing at last. Helen woke to find herself still in his arms, her cheek against his chest. For a moment she stayed still, listening to the strong beat of his heart. When she stirred, Benjamin loosened his hold,
giving her the choice to move away. But she did not move. She turned to face him, her green eyes meeting his dark ones in the soft light. "I don't want to go back to the cot," she whispered. Benjamin's jaw tightened, and for a heartbeat, she wondered if she had gone too far. But then his voice came low and certain. "Then you won't. You'll stay right here with me for as long as you want to stay." Tears stung Helen's eyes. She had come to this mountain with nothing. No money, no home, no future. And now, against all odds, she had found something stronger than survival. She had found a man who valued her work, her dignity, her presence, not as a burden, not as a pity, but as a partner. The days that followed were unlike anything she had known before. Their routine continued: chores at dawn, tending cattle, chopping wood, cooking meals. But everything had changed between them. There was no more awkward silence. When Benjamin returned from the corrals at night, Helen waited for him with supper ready, her heart lifting at the sound of his boots on the porch. When she mended his shirts by the fire, he watched her hands with quiet respect. Their conversations grew longer, deeper, weaving together two lives that had once been separate. Helen began to laugh again, something she had not done since Thomas's death. Sometimes Benjamin would say something dry and unexpected that caught her off guard, and she would laugh until her sides hurt. And though he rarely smiled, when he did, it felt like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. By January, the snow was high against the windows, cutting them off from the world. Yet Helen no longer felt trapped. The mountains that had once seemed cruel now felt like protection, wrapping them in silence where only the two of them existed. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Helen set down her sewing and looked at him with steady eyes. "I was ready to sleep in your barn just for work," she said softly. "But you gave me more than work. You gave me a home." Benjamin's gaze held hers for a long moment. Then he leaned forward, his rough hand covering her smaller one. "And you gave me more than help. You gave me someone worth coming home to." The fire crackled. The storm outside whispered through the trees. And in that quiet cabin, two souls who had been broken by loss found something they never expected to find again: hope. Helen Evans had come to the mountains desperate, trembling, ready to beg for scraps. But she had found her place, not in a barn, not in a cot, but beside a man who understood her worth. Together, they faced the long winter, not as strangers bound by necessity, but as partners bound by something deeper. And when spring came, melting the snow and filling the valley with new life, Helen knew one truth with all her heart. Sometimes the mountains take everything from you, but sometimes, if you are brave enough to climb, they give you back something even greater.